Psachas Kiddushin Daf Dalet begins by wrapping up the Gemara's last discussion about when you give something to an Eved or to an Isha to use for a specific task and not to belong to the Adon or the Baal. Does that work, or does it automatically go to the Adon and the Baal? We had a Machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. We're going to now show a place where they hold the opposite shitas and resolve them. Then the Gemara will get into the halachas of Evan Kanani again, and that which they can go free with the loss of a limb or a tooth. And the Gemara will go into the halachas of Nezikin entirely along that sugya. So let's begin. The Gemara has just said that if someone gives money to an Eved Kanani for him to use to redeem himself, not to belong to him. So there was a machlokes if that works and the money stays separate from the Adon's money, or since everything the Eved owns is owned by the Adon, the money automatically goes to the Adon. He can't keep it separate. Over there, Rabbi Meir had said that it is koina to the Eved. The Eved can use it to redeem himself. It does not automatically go to the Adon. And the Rabbanan said, no, it doesn't work. It goes to the Adon anyway, and he can't use it to redeem himself. So now the Gemara wants to show that you have the opposite machlokes, again, between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. It's going to be it'll be a stira in both of them, Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. What happens when somebody gives property to a woman to keep from her husband? So the sugya centers around a brisa discussing the halachas of Meiser Sheni. So when somebody has Meiser Sheni, he's supposed to redeem them and take them to Yerushalayim. Now, if he redeems his own Meiser Sheni, he has to add a fifth of the value. He has to give a fifth more in money than it was worth in fruits. If someone else redeems his Meiser Sheni, that person doesn't have to add the fifth. So you can have someone else redeem it for you, and he can then take the money, but he doesn't have to add that. Chaimish doesn't have to add that fifth. The question arises, what happens if it's a man's wife? Does she have to add a fifth, or is she considered to be someone else, not considered to be him, and therefore she does not have to add a fifth? So it's a machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. So the Chachamim say she does not have to add a fifth, which sounds like she's separate from him. And Shimon ben Elazar quotes Rabbi Meir, who says that she has to add a fifth, which means that she counts as the same as her husband. So now the Gemara wants to know, whose money are we talking about here? What's the case exactly? If she's using her husband's money to redeem her husband's Meiser Sheni, so she's acting as a shliach of her husband. So there can't be any way that anybody would hold that she doesn't have to add the fifth. She's certainly functioning as a husband himself, and therefore it's one's own money, and the fifth, the chaimish, has to be added. What then could it be? It could be her own money that she brought into the marriage, what we call nichsei malug, that she owned before the marriage, and therefore stays her own possession even when she comes into the marriage with it. If she uses that, then it can't be the other way. There's no way of understanding that she should have to add the fifth, because the Torah says ish, and we have a drasha, ish v'loi isha. It's only a man using his money, not a woman using her money, so that drasha wouldn't make sense at all. So what then is the case? So the case has to be just like our case, that somebody gave her money to use to redeem her husband's Meiser Sheni. It could even be her husband gave it to her specifically, and therefore it's given for a specific task, not to go to her husband's possession, to be used to redeem the Meiser Sheni, and to stay separate. So does that work to be that this money should be separate property from her husband's, and therefore it's her own redemption, and now you could have a machlekes? That must be what we are referring to here. And then you see the opposite. You see that Rabbi Meir said that it stays separate from her husband, which is the opposite of what he said by the Eved Kanani, and the Rabbanan say that it belongs to the husband, which is the opposite of what he said by the Eved Kanani. So how do you resolve this contradiction? So the Gemara gives two answers. Abaye says, you're right, you have to switch the opinions. It was recorded incorrectly. Rabbi says you don't have to switch it. Here we're talking about something else. Here, it's not referring to the meiser of her husband. It's referring to meiser that she inherited. That she inherited from her father. After she was married, her father died and left her an inheritance of Meiser Sheni. The question is, does the husband gain possession of that inheritance? And the issue is Meiser considered to be hektish money or not? The halacha is that the husband only inherits chulin money, does not inherit hektish money. So the opinions are as follows. Rabbi Meir holds that it's hektish money, and therefore the husband does not inherit it, and therefore it's considered to be a separate money from her husband's, and you don't have to add chaimish. And the Ramon say it is the husband's. It's not considered to be mammon hektish, and when she's redeeming it, she's acting as a shliach of her husband with her husband's money, redeeming her husband's meiser, and she has to add a chaimish. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to discuss the halacha that an eved Kenani goes free if he is struck by his master and he loses a limb. So the Torah mentions a tooth and an eye. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says all other limbs, as well as a list of 24 other limbs or tips of limbs that count in this halacha, and they're listed in the Gemara on the next daf chafei. So the Gemara asks, how do you know? The Torah only said a tooth and an eye. Someone says you can learn it out of tooth and eye. As a mamatzino, tooth and eye, what are they? They are limbs which are visible wounds if they are lost, and they don't grow back. So any other limb which is visible if there's a mum created by their loss and they don't grow back, they also set the Eved Kenani free. So the Gemara asks, but you should have what's called Shnei Ksufim Banka Echad Ve'ein Belamda. Whenever the Torah says something once, you can learn from it to everywhere else that it applies. If it says it twice, the reason that it says it twice is to show that you can't learn it anywhere else. So it says a tooth and an eye. Why does it say both of them? It must be to teach you that you should not expand this halacha. Someone says, no, there's a reason that you had to say both tooth and eye, and I would not have known one from the other, and therefore neither of them are extra, and there's no Shnei Ksufim. Why would I need to say tooth and eye? If I would have only said a tooth, I would think that that refers to even a tooth which is going to be replaced, even the baby teeth which fall out, and that if that gets knocked out, then he goes free from that also. Therefore, you have to say eye to teach me only something which is like an eye that does not get replaced. And if it would have just said eye, then I would have not known that a tooth sets the Eved free, because he's not born with a tooth. I would have think it's only an eye which the Eved is born with. Kamashma, tooth, a permanent tooth, that is, which is a permanent loss, even though he's not born with it. The Gemara now asks us another way to say this drasha, which you shouldn't learn these halachas to other limbs, and that's you should say that it is a klal uprat. And what's the klal and what's the prat? What's the general term and the specific term? So we begin with kiyake, a general term, any type of hitting, and then we specify shein v'ayin, only an eye and a tooth. So you have a klal uprat. The halacha is you always go only with the prat, you don't add anything to it. So Moshe says, no, it's a klal prat klal, because there's another expanding term afterwards that says l'chavshi yishalchenu, you should send him free. It could have just said chavshihu, he's free. That this expands it. It says l'chavshi yishalchenu. So therefore you have a klal prat klal, and the rule is whenever you have that, you add something to the prat which is similar to the prat. You define the category, and therefore we define it as something which is visible and doesn't heal. So therefore anything which is visible and doesn't heal is included. So the Gemara asks, but why do you define it so tightly? Define it a little bit more specifically. Define it as something which is visible, doesn't heal, and causes a loss of function. So that would exclude if he pulls his beard, if the other pulls the Eved's beard and causes something to be dislocated, that doesn't cause any loss of a function. Yet we have a brisa that says that the Eved goes free with that. But according to your klal prat klal svara, you should exclude that, because the klal prat klal is only something which loses function. The Gemara answers, when it says the chavshi yishachenu, it's not just a klal prat klal, it's actually a riboy miyit. Riboy miyit, riboy always functions as including everything except for something, and therefore we widen the category to even include things which do not include a loss of function. So the Gemara asks, if that's true, you should even include if he struck him on his hand and it withered but it's going to heal. Why do you exclude things that are going to heal? So the Gemara says, because then what would be the point of the miyad at all? What is shein v'ayin doing? You have to exclude something, and it excludes things that are going to heal. The Gemara now brings in another discussion which is related, and that is, when an Eved Kenani goes free because of the loss of a limb, does he require a get shechor? The halacha is there are two aspects of being an Eved Kanani. First of all, he belongs to his Zanin, and second of all, he has halachic status of an Eved. When he goes free, he has to take care of both of those issues. He has to change possession, that he doesn't belong to Zanin, he belongs to himself, and he also has to take off the halachic status of an Eved and become a regular Yisrael. Now the question is, when he goes free because of loss of a limb, does that only change his possession? The owner has set him free. But in order for him to achieve halachic status as a Yisrael, he needs a get shechur. Or does it automatically include both of those things? Marco Tzabraisa has three sets of machlekes on the subject. Rav Shimon and Rabbi Meir. So Rav Shimon says he requires the get shechur. Rav Meir says he does not. Rav Elazar says he requires. Rav Tarfon says he does not. And Rabbi Kiva says he requires. It came the Machriim, those who decide machlekes, in front of the Chum, and they said it should depend on why he's going free. Which limb did he lose? If he lost a tooth and an eye where the Torah specifies it, so we should go like Rabbi Tarfon and say that sets him free completely, it changes the status, and he does not require get shechur to change the status. If, however, he's losing one of the other limbs, then we should say like Rabbi Kiva, it requires to get shechur as well, because the Torah didn't give him that freedom. The Chachamim penalized his owner for hurting him. Versus the Chacham penalize him. So that's not what happened. It's not a rabbinic decree. And they made drashas from the psukim. So we're saying, okay, well, since it's a drasha from the pasuk, therefore it has a separate halacha. Now, what's Reb Shimon's reasoning? So Gemara says because it says shiluach. It says lachav sheyishalchenu, and you learn shiluach from here to shiluach that it says by an isha. Just like she requires a get to change her halachic status, here also requires a get to change the halachic status of the Eved. What does Rabbi Meir argue on that? So Rabbi Meir says, if we would say Yishalchenu Chavshi, then I would understand, because you're telling him that we should send him to freedom. So you have to do a shiluach, you have to send him. But it doesn't say that. It says Chavshi Yishalchenu. That means he is free, and then you should send him. Therefore, it's not talking about you sending him free. The freedom is without you. The Yishalchenu comes afterwards, and that's for the drasha that we said before to include other limbs. The Gemara now turns to what happens if he didn't cause loss of a limb, but he did cause loss of a function. So we bring a brisa that says if he hit him in the eye and blinded it, but he didn't lose it, or if he hit him in the ear and he couldn't hear, those count, and the Eved goes free because of that wound. However, if he caused him loss of a function without touching him, like he made a loud noise, he hit the wall, and that caused him to go blind or to lose his hearing, then he does not go free because of that. The Gemara says, what do you mean? Rav Shemin said to Rav Ashi, does that mean that causing sound is not called causing a hezek? You're not responsible for the sounds you make and the damages they cause? That's not true.